Today's lesson is how to create a series of values and shading to create a value scale of 8 different values. So we're going to start by pushing really lightly and maintaining that same pressure throughout. So instead of guessing how much harder you're going to press to create darker values, what we're going to do is just maintain one level of pressure. And what this will do is make it simpler. So the darker values are going to be arranged in order from light to dark. And to get darker, what we're simply going to do is layer. So the more layers we're going to apply, the darker the value is going to be. So this will also make it a lot easier and more controllable because you're going to see the values progress more gradually. So I'm going to start here, and what I'm simply going to do is hold my pencil so I have some distance, and I'm just going to go back and forth. And this is the lightest value that I can get. The pencil that I'm using is a 2B. So it's kind of light, but not super light. And this, holding the pencil gently, is the lightest value that the 2B will give me. So if I wanted to get a lighter value that's not empty, then I could use a harder tip, like maybe a B or an HB. So right now this is kind of a mid-tone charcoal pencil that in our class we'll use on a regular basis, and I want to explore what range of values this particular pencil will give me. This is a number 2 charcoal pencil. So I'm going to repeat the same thing in this section. And repetition is good because what it does is give me a sense of control. So I have a value here that's very similar to the first one. And then all I'm going to do now is just go over that value, go over that section again to give myself a darker value. So you can clearly see that there's a difference between the first and second. And then if I repeat that same process again, you'll notice that this value and this value is very much the same. If I repeat the second step, which is the second layer, now these two match, and to get it darker, I just put another layer on it. So you can see the progression is gradual but steady. And this gives us a lot more control in our shading. It gives us a lot more control in being able to get a range of values. And it makes it easier because you're not having to guess. You're not having to try to predict pressure. You're just maintaining one pressure. So thinking about one thing is certainly easier than having a variety of thoughts and ideas or goals in mind. I want to try to keep a loose hand. Of course, I'm not a machine, so there are always going to be some subtle variations, but it's a lot easier to control if you do things gradually than if you just try to do it in one shot. The other thing that you may notice here is that the texture of the paper starts to reveal itself. So most papers will have some kind of grain, which is nice. So we can see a good progression. If there's some area there that needs a little bit more, you can always go back. So it's a lot easier to add than to take away. In a situation like this, you can see that your values develop little by little, and therefore it's a lot easier to make corrections or adjustments to your overall drawing. This technique will also give you the opportunity to get a much wider range of values. So in this lesson, I'm only doing 8 values, but there's nothing that says that I cannot achieve more than 8 values. I can probably achieve 15 or 20 values using this technique. And the shift between one value and the other will be subtle. The other thing that you'll notice is that I'm not changing directions in my strokes. For this exercise, not only am I keeping the same amount of pressure consistent throughout the entire shading process, but I'm also shading in one direction. There's a reason for that, and in our next lesson we're going to talk about the direction of shading as it relates to the direction or movement of light, and how that affects an object, and how we shade an object in relationship to the way that light is introduced into that space or onto that object. The last thing I want to mention here is that it's really important for you to have a sharp long tip on your pencil. If your pencil is worn out and you don't have a good long tip, this is going to be increasingly difficult, if not impossible. The angle of your hand and the angle of the tool as it touches the paper is important. If I have to do this with my hand, then I lose that range of motion. So one of the most important things in being able to be successful in controlling your tool is to have a relaxed hand. And in order to do that, your tool has to be prepared to function correctly. So if you don't have the right tip, then pretty much everything else is null and void. So here we have 8 values, and we have a range of values that's obvious yet subtle. I can certainly keep going, but right now I have a good demonstration of how to create a range of values. And if I see something, so for example, I can evaluate what I'm doing here right now. I see that this one and this one may be a little bit too close, right? So I can always adjust. So that would mean that this one should be a little darker than that one. So all I'm going to do here is give this one another layer. So now I can definitely see that there's a little bit more of a difference between these two. And now I want to check these. These look very similar now. So what I'm going to do is adjust this one a little bit more. So this technique really helps because it allows me to make these changes not blindly but comparing. So I always want to create and make decisions based on comparisons. So that is a good shift. And now I'll check the last 2, and those look pretty good. So I have a good range in my values throughout the entire scale without it being too different. So if this was black, it would be too powerful compared to everything else. And if this was empty space, it would be too light compared to everything else. So a value is not empty space and it's not super black. It's this range between the two.